Melanie Phillips, thanks for joining us again on the Trumpet Daily. Only this time we're meeting you in Jerusalem, and you split your time between the UK and Jerusalem. About how much do you stay here in Jerusalem?
I'm here most of the time in Jerusalem, but I go to London a very great deal. Much of my work is based in London. I have family in London and family here in Israel too. But I was here during the 12-day enterprise in the war. I say enterprise because the war is continuing. Strange as it may seem, because it was a frightening experience, being under missile attack. You know, we were up and down in the middle of the night, several times a night, into the shelter, never knowing quite whether, the missiles overhead were going to be intercepted, whether they're going to land, whether they do damage. So it was alarming. And nevertheless, it was a great privilege to be here. I felt it was an enormous privilege. I was extremely glad to be here because, strange as it may sound, even though it was a very frightening experience, the fact that I was here in Jerusalem at what feels like and felt like and continues to feel like the very epicenter of what is a seismic period for the Jewish people, State of Israel, Jewish people, and the world in general. And you're here at the very epicenter of it. And that's an amazing experience to feel that. And also to feel that you're very much part of the Jewish people. This is what we are. We are one people, and we are standing together against the forces of barbarism. And there's this tremendous feeling in Israel during the whole of this terrible war of the last 21 months, and certainly when you're under missile attack and so on, there's this tremendous feeling of coming together, that everybody has your back. You go out into the street and you may be divided on political grounds. As you probably know, the Israelis are an intensely disputatious and argumentative people. But nevertheless, you know that ultimately everyone has everyone else's back. Yeah. And in Britain, the place of my birth and where I was born and bred, I don't feel that at all. I feel I'm not surrounded by what I'm surrounded by here, which is love and commitment and positivity and the certainty that we're going to win, that we're going to defeat the forces of evil, that the forces of goodness are eventually going to triumph. You don't feel that at all in Britain.
Just so our viewers know, we may not have gotten into this the last time you were on the show with us, but when they hear your voice, they may not know that you have dual citizenship, both in the UK and Jerusalem or Israel. So now it makes sense to them, I suppose, that you spend a good deal of your time here. How much, with respect to your work, is your focus more on Britain or Israel, or split?
I don't normally write about Israel in terms of its internal doings. I don't really feel that I know enough. My Hebrew isn't good enough for me to really connect to everything that's going on. I do write about Israel's place in the world, so relationships between Israel and America, the kind of Israel's place in the regional upheavals and so on. But I write a great deal about Britain. I write a weekly op-ed column for the Times of London, and so I need to be very much connected with what's going on in Britain all the time.
Okay. You said earlier you were happy to be here when the war was going on, and that it continues. There's been quite a few commentators, and even President Trump has been pretty adamant about it's over, it's finished. He got very angry when there was a rush to do more bombing right there at the end before the ceasefire started. So maybe you could explain, in what way is this war that Israel's engaged in not over?
Well, first of all, it was extremely helpful, to put it mildly, that President Trump decided to come in when he did and bombed the Fordo and the other two major nuclear sites in Iran, and thus caused very much more damage to them than anything the Israelis could have done so quickly, if at all. And that was obviously enormously helpful and very significant. But the idea that ends the Iranian threat is simply not so. The Iranian threat continues while the regime is in power. The regime is very much still in power, even though it's very much weakened. It is, by all accounts, from what we can gather, engaged in intense repression of its own people. It's been rounding up people. It's been rounding up the hapless Jewish community that remains in Iran. We don't know what's happened to these people. Some of them we believe have been murdered. We don't know. So internally, it's still very active. And as far as its war against Israel and America and the West is concerned, it's very much still on. The regime is still making warlike noises. It's still threatening to murder President Trump, to murder Prime Minister of the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. As far as it's concerned, it's basically business as normal. It's had a setback. Now, anyone who's followed the wiles of the Iranian regime for decades would expect that although we assume that Fordo and the other two major nuclear sites are out of action for the foreseeable future, we don't know how much damage was done. We are still not sure, and we don't know whether a quantity of enriched uranium, which was thought to be in Fordo, we don't know whether it's been buried for all time there or whether it was spirited away beforehand. And anyone who knows anything about the Iranian regime will expect that they will have had and will still have very secret sites, smaller maybe,
right.
Where they would have centrifuges and the apparatus
right.
of their nuclear program. Israel, the Israeli Air Force knocked out a very large number of their rocket launchers and a large number of their missiles. They still have apparently thousands of missiles. And we read that, China is importing into Iran new rocket launchers. So this continues, and also they have countless numbers of sleeper cells, we've been told for years, embedded in Britain, in America and elsewhere, ready to continue to wreak the terrorist havoc which Iran has been wreaking against America's interests and the West for decades. So of course it's not over. It's not over until, I'm afraid to say, because I realise the implications of this are maybe unpalatable for President Trump, who wants this done and dusted.
Right.
It's not done and dusted, and it won't be over until the regime is no longer in existence in Tehran.
Do you think that's likely?
I have no idea. We know that there's a very significant number of Iranians, perhaps the vast majority, I don't know, but certainly a very significant number, who have periodically risen up against the regime, but I think the regime is still far too strong internally, and the population is too oppressed for that to be a serious consideration. In addition, as I understand it, although possibly the vast majority of Iranians hate the regime and want it gone, they don't coalesce around an opposition that could really take power, and they don't really coalesce around a leader that has popular support. So that doesn't look terribly promising in the immediate future. How would the regime be brought down? Well, there are a number of ways it can be brought down, but one way is for America to introduce really draconian sanctions and to take out, these are all draconian measures, but to take out the sources of their economic income. For example, the oil facilities at Kharg Island and elsewhere. Now this is big stuff, because it would have a direct impact on the people as well as their regime. I'm not privy to what else might be done, but one way or another, the threat continues while the regime is there.
It seems like President Trump is going to the, you mentioned sanctions, it seems like he's going in the other direction, because he talks about wanting to make a deal and talk, even to Iran and to welcome them back, help them rebuild. And this comes, right after the war. and so, what's your thoughts on trying to negotiate with Iran?
Well, straight after the war, straight after the 12-day war, I should say, I was extremely concerned to hear what President Trump was saying. Like, this is the end of it. We've taken out Fordo. Iran is no longer a threat. Now let's make the deal. Now, his view may have changed since then, because since then the Iranian regime has been responding to his invitation, let's make a deal, by saying we're going to kill you and we're going to continue the war. And he's clearly got very, very annoyed. And the last I heard, he said, I'm no longer negotiating with them.
Okay.
Nevertheless, I think it's been a concern of mine, and I think of many people who we are pleased that President Trump has taken the initiatives he's taken. And his support for Israel, his emotional support for Israel, I don't think can be doubted. But I think he has, there's a trait in his character which I think is unhelpful in these circumstances, which is his belief that every problem is susceptible to a deal. And the reason why the problem continues is because he himself hasn't been involved in making the deal. Now, he seemed to think that was true of President Putin of Russia. He thought it was true of the Ayatollah in Tehran. He thinks it's true generally. Now, in general, he may be right. Many people are susceptible to a deal made on the right sort of terms, whether it's through inducements or threats, whatever. But there are certain agendas which are non-negotiable. And the regime that is in power in Iran is a regime of religious fanatics. They are not susceptible to what the West thinks that everyone is susceptible to, which is basically appeals to their self-interest and sort of a rational understanding of their self-interest. These are religious fanatics who believe that they have a divinely mandated duty to destroy Israel, kill Jews, conquer the West, destroy America. Mandated duty from God. And they also believe this particular sect that of Shia Islam that runs the regime, which is called the Twelvers. Why are they called the Twelvers? Because they believe in someone who was called the 12th Imam, who is a kind of Shia Islamic Messiah. And they believe that the Shia Messiah, the 12th Imam, will be brought to earth in an apocalypse. Now, if you're dealing with people who believe that by bringing about an apocalypse they will bring to earth the Messiah, you are not dealing with people who will negotiate in their self-interest, anything. They will negotiate on the basis that they will try and use deception, as they have done for decades, to pull the wool over the eyes of the gullible West, a West which does not understand religious fanaticism at all, which insists on viewing people like this through the prism, through the lens of the West itself, that everyone is governed like us in the West, by reason and by self-interest, and they have, as a result, pulled the wool over the West's eyes for decades and have made a monkey of the West and have run rings around them, and that's why we are where we are. So I was concerned about President Trump's affinity for deal-making. I like to think that he is learning on the job, that he's learning from experience day by day. He can see the result, he can see the reaction to his offer of a deal. It's, we're going to kill you.
Earlier today you were telling us that another one of your big concerns is the deal making or the reaching out to Qatar. Maybe you could just try to summarize what you were saying. I hate to have you repeat it, but it was great.
Yeah, well, it's a puzzle to me. The love affair between the West, particularly America and Britain, and Qatar. Qatar is a Gulf state which is unlike the other Gulf states, which are very pro-Western, and it's hoped that that Saudi Arabia will come into the Abraham Accords and that this will be a kind of regional peace. Let's hope. But Qatar has been an outlier for decades, because Qatar is the Muslim Brotherhood, for reasons that I think to do with tribalism, particular types of Islamic sect. But put that to one side. The fact is, Qatar is Hamas. This war, the hostages could have been released and could now be released if America said to Qatar, unless you release them, like within 24 hours, we're out of here and you're out of here. Our airbase goes, we wash our hands of you, you are then going to be pariahs. Now, why doesn't it do that? Why does the West lean over backwards to say Qatar is our friend, it is so helpful to us? Qatar has been used for the last 21 months as interlocutors in the negotiations between America and Hamas. interlocutors, as if Qatar acts in good faith. Qatar is Hamas. This is a joke. So why doesn't America get tough with Qatar? Well, I can only assume it's because Qatar has for decades played the most brilliant game of all, which is basically to buy its way into America and buy its way into Britain in a way which makes Britain and America dependent on Qatar. Financially, I mean, Qatar has invested so much in American universities and in British infrastructure. And so I can only assume that it's got itself into a position where it makes it very difficult for America and Britain to extricate itself from that relationship. But it's a deadly relationship because basically you have America treating as an honest interlocutor, acting in good faith, as a potential friend, and potentially, I fear, what America will see as part of the regional infrastructure it is trying to construct as a permanent solution to the whole regional mess in the Middle East. If Qatar is part of that, then it's not going to be a solution. It's going to be another means of pulling the wool over the West's eyes, infiltrating from underneath the West's defences, and wreaking havoc from inside.
So you say it's Hamas. The Hamas leaders, a lot of them are there, and Hamas, of course, started the war with Israel 21 months ago. What would you? I mentioned to you earlier today about how Israel seems like was caught asleep at the wheel and not really ready for an attack such as that. Even going back before the security breach that happened that morning, October 7, what was the lead up to that like that exposed Israel to such a horrific attack?
Well, the short answer is I don't know, and none of us knows. We know some of the story that unfolded as a result of what happened on October 7. We know some of the story of the hours that led up to that. But ultimately, we await the final accounting, insofar as perhaps we're ever going to have a final accounting. But they were asleep at the wheel, so much so that the young women who were employed by the Israel Defense Forces on the border of Gaza, specifically to watch over the border, to watch the electronic fence and to watch the activity they could see behind it, they sounded the alarm more than once to their commanders and said, things are happening down there which are not right. They look like they're preparing for something big, and they became more and more urgent in their warnings, and it was all brushed aside. Now, precisely why it was brushed aside and precisely who brushed it aside, we know some of it but not all of it. But what appears to be the case is that there was what's called in Israel the conceptia, the concept. There was a concept about Gaza which, with hindsight, turns out to have been an absolutely disastrous concept. What was the concept? It was, I think, founded in the belief that Gaza was an absolute mess. In Israel we couldn't work out how to deal with it, how to conquer Hamas without reoccupying, because Israel came out of Gaza completely in 2005. Right. All we could do was what was called in Israel mowing the lawn. That we knew it was all terrible. We knew that the Hamas was there. We knew they were doing terrible things. Every so often, we knew that because they were sending rockets over the whole time. I mean, the town of Sderot in the south was living in shelters for years. So when that became too much for everybody to bear, when the violence from Gaza became too much, so the IDF went in, it made war, a lot of damage was done to the Hamas, it was set back, the world shrieked about how terrible this was, that Israel was doing it okay, and Israel came out, and then the violence subsided, and then it started again. That was what's called mowing the lawn. And that, I think, was what they thought was the best that could be achieved. Now, why did they think that? Because it was clearly absurd to think you could hold that forever. Well, in my view, and I'm speaking only personally, I don't have any inside information, I'm just looking at it from the outside. Right. But in my view, the preoccupations, particularly with Prime Minister Netanyahu, for the last 40 years, ever since the Iranian regime came to power, he has understood the big thing, which was Iran. This, the threat from Iran was the big thing that threatened Israel, and Iran was the head of the snake. And Iran was, investing in all these proxy armies around the region, in Iraq, in Syria, in the disputed territories of what's called the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and in Lebanon, in the Hezbollah, and of course the Houthis in Yemen, which nobody really thought about very much, but where do they come from? That was kind of thinking. So all attention was on Iran, and we know now from the very successful Israeli operation in Iran in the 12-day war, we know that the IDF and the Mossad had been planning that and other operations within Iran for 20 years. Their attention was focused there for very understandable reasons. We now know they penetrated the Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Iranian the Iranian regime, the IRGC and elsewhere in Iran. Israel penetrated it to such an extent that the Iranians and the Hezbollah suddenly realized, after it was all over, the Israelis knew everything that was going on there. The Israelis knew nothing about what was going on in Gaza. They did not invest in Gaza. They did not have people living there who were their eyes and ears, and they did not invest in human intelligence. They relied on that border fence. They had no intelligence there, so they were caught absolutely napping. So between the concept, which was wrong, that we're mowing the lawn, the fact they had no intelligence, and then the final sort of wrinkle of that failed concept was that they told themselves, and this is baffling to me, but they told themselves over the last 2-3 years that the Hamas in Gaza was no longer interested in waging war. They'd gone off that idea, that the rockets that were coming over were other Islamists, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and groups like that. But the Hamas itself was invested heavily now, so the Israelis told themselves, in building up legitimacy among the public in Gaza. Now, this is beyond belief they could have thought that, because the Hamas are not democratically elected in the sense that they are answerable to the people. They rule through terror, through terrorizing their own people, through killing them in great number, through locking them up, through threatening them. It is a tyranny. They're not dependent on popular support. It was a ruse, and the Israelis fell for it. Now, why they fell for it, after all these decades of fighting what is basically an Islamic Holy War to exterminate the Jewish homeland, the Jewish state, I cannot answer that question, and maybe we'll never know the reason for it, but all those things led to this catastrophe of October 7, in which even when these young women, spotters, whatever they're called, of the IDF, said something big is happening here, everybody brushed it aside, and these young women were murdered.
Yeah. You mentioned the Islamic Holy War. You're one of very few commentators who talk openly about the religious element to all of these acts of terrorism. Right. Why aren't more people going to that source of this terror?
Well, it is, on the face of it, quite baffling because it's so obvious. I mean, since the 1920s, when the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was not just a supporter, an ally of Hitler, and who undertook that Haj Amin would impose the final solution in the Middle East. He would eradicate all Jews, just as Hitler was doing in Europe. He incited holy war, Islamic holy war. He was one of the original Islamists, that is to say, Muslims who believe in conquering the non-Islamic world through force. And that came out in the 1920s as a result of the fall of the Ottoman Empire after the First World War, which released these forces, these jihadi forces within the Islamic world, which had hitherto been suppressed by the Ottomans. So Hajj Amin was part of that. And so from that moment, it was an Islamic holy war. Now, scroll on and we find Mahmoud Abbas, the so-called moderate head of the Palestinian Authority, using exactly the same language as Hajj Amin, who is, according to Mahmoud Abbas's own words, Mahmoud Abbas's great role model was Hajj Amin al-Husseini. And Mahmoud Abbas has said, the Israelis must get their filthy feet off Al-Aqsa. This is, one of the holiest sites for Judaism, which is the Temple Mount.
Right.
Mahmoud Abbas has presented falsely the claim over and over again that Israel is engaged in a holy war against Islam because it wants to destroy Al-Aqsa. Complete fabrication and lie. So, and the language used certainly by the Hamas, but also by Mahmoud Abbas's Palestinian Authority, all the preachers and the educational materials and so on, they're infused with Islamic holy war. They use quotations all the time from the Quran and from the Hadith, also Islamic holy sources, religious sources, which enjoin Muslims to murder Jews all the time. And yet people never refer to this, and it's been a source of great mystery to me that Israel's governments, successive governments, have by and large not referred to it. Okay, so Prime Minister Netanyahu in recent years has very much said, that the West must realize that Israel is fighting the West's war for it because the Muslim Brotherhood, which is the Hamas, is coming for the West as well. This is all absolutely correct. But in terms of the kind of internal debate or conversation that goes on in Israel all the time, it's not presented as an Islamic holy war at all. Maybe that's because, as I've been told, it's too demoralizing to think of it in that way, because there are, however many Muslims there are in the world, 1.8 billion, whatever it is, maybe more. Israel can't afford to think of itself in that way, being up against such a force, and so it's kind of easier to think of it, to think of this terrible conflict as being just a war of extermination against the state of Israel and against Jewish people. That's bad enough. Maybe it's that. Maybe it's that they are too close to the Islamic world and haven't been able to see it as clearly as they should have been, because they've made accommodations with it. There are many Israeli Arabs. There are 20% of Israel is Arab, of whom I think the vast majority are Muslim, and they're okay. With some exceptions, but broadly, they are integrated into the society. They're working as doctors and as pharmacists. They're in the universities. You go to the cinema alongside people. They're Israeli Arabs, and they are Muslims. So the Israeli Arabs subscribe to Israeliness. That is to say, they may have. They may not like the government of the day. They may have disobliging attitudes towards how Israel should behave towards the Arab world. That's not quite the point. They are Israeli. They are invested in a civic identity, which is the Jewish state. Whether they like it or not, that's what they are. They're Israeli, and Israel is a Jewish state. And when you look at Europe, it's a very different matter. You have there Muslims who are Islamizing deliberately. They are trying to make Britain and Europe, which are Western, fundamentally Christian societies, into Islamic ones. That's a very different matter. And even in Britain, I can't speak about Europe because I really just know about Britain, but even in Britain, there is a denial of the religious element in this.
Well, as I told you earlier today, even in America, after 9/11, we called the war a war against terrorism.
Right.
We made a point, George W. Bush made a point to say this is not a war against Islam.
Islam is a religion of peace.
Right, it's a religion of peace. So why, Britain, America,
Yeah.
Israel, why are the leaders so afraid, I guess, of labeling it what it is?
Well, partly it's fear, because the numbers are so great. And even before the numbers were so great, the threat was so great. The threat of terrorism, suicide bombing. I mean, Britain has had loads of suicide bombings with, leaving terrible carnage. So they were always frightened about that. They were always frightened in Britain of what they called civil war, that the Muslims would rise up. Even before there were so many, they were frightened that they would rise up. So fear certainly plays a very large part. But then there's this paralyzing ideological orthodoxy in the whole liberal progressive world, which includes a lot of so-called conservatives in Britain and America and in Europe, which is that you can't criticize, let alone stigmatize, let alone take condign action against a minority faith. You can't say that the West is any better than any other faith, than any other culture. You can't say that Western values are any better than any other values. That's racism. This has had a paralyzing effect. That's the second point. The third point, which comes back to, I think, something I said to you a few minutes ago. The West does not get religion. As the West becomes more and more secular, and this is more the case in Britain than anywhere else, because Britain is the most godless in the West, for various reasons, they just don't understand the religious mindset. So, for example, when Britain was going through suicide bombings, a very common reaction among ordinary people was, why are they bombing us? Why do they want to kill us? We've not done anything to them. We've not done anything to the Arab or Muslim world. So what have they got against us? Well, there must be a reason for it. There must be a reason for it. What could be the reason? It's our support of Israel. So they went down that rabbit hole. But the point is this: they can't get into their heads the religious mindset, which is that when these people blew themselves up, they weren't doing so out of despair, because that's what the British said. Why are they doing this? They must be in such despair. Can you imagine what they must be going through in order to do this to themselves? Well, no, they're actually blowing themselves up in a spirit of ecstasy, because they are doing what in their view is God's work in murdering, killing people who are not Muslim in order to Islamize the society. They were ecstatic. Okay, some of them we can see. They were people who were sick in the head, they were drugged, they were frightened, but the point is they come from a culture which teaches them that their highest calling in life is to produce death of themselves and of others. They say, we love death, you love life, we win. And the British and other Westerners go, when they hear that, they can't even begin to understand what that means, because they don't think in terms of religion. They don't understand that for some people, the motivation which is held to be divinely inspired acts on you in a completely different way from anything in the West, which is all about rationality and self-interest and all those sorts of things. So I think all those three things really amount to a catastrophic denial of what the West is up against, which continues to this day.
Yeah. I don't want to get you too far off course, but you said earlier that there are various reasons that Britain is more godless than the others in the West. What are those various reasons?
Well, that's a very long
story. I'm very curious. Summarize quickly.
Okay. 2 reasons. First of all, demoralization. Britain, lost an empire, lost a role, never found a role, all that. Britain suffered Britain suffered the terrible carnage of the First World War, the carnage in the trenches, which took out an entire generation, basically. And it said, like, never again. But it also said, I think at a very deep level, God is dead. Where was God in the trenches, right? And then you had the Holocaust. And then again, where was God? And this played in a particular way in Britain, because Britain was already primed for the death of God, which had been accelerating really since the middle of the 19th century. And for this reason, and this is just my view, but unlike in America, where you have, okay, it's eroding around the edges, we can talk about that on another occasion, but you have still the sort of great bedrock of scripturally faithful Christian religious belief, particularly in what's called the red states. Right. And that's acted as a kind of bulwark in what's called the culture wars. You've had, a Christian-led fight back against leftist universalism, which is basically secular. Now, in Britain, there was no fight back at all. Why? Because the church was in the forefront of the collapse. The Church of England, the established church, the Anglican church, turned over the course of the 20th century away from belief in God, and that being its main function in life, to proclaim that belief, to being a kind of church of social justice. And why was that? Well, this is again a very complicated set of reasons, but the fundamental reason, which was put to me by a Christian thinker, which I thought was very persuasive, was that the Church of England is based on a settlement which was designed to end the catastrophic wars of religion that were going on after Henry VIII broke with the Church of Rome. But it wasn't a clean break. The people were still broadly Catholic. There were terrible wars of religion. Long story short, Church of England was kind of invented to settle that, which it did brilliantly. But it did it through the erection of these wonderful cathedrals, through the genius of the King James Bible, the prayer book, with its soaring rhetoric. And between those two things, strange as this may seem, it created the kind of architecture of religiosity. But there wasn't anything underneath. Doctrinally, there was nothing. It was kind of, what was it? And so when the winds of Darwinism and all that blew from the 19th century, middle of the 19th century onwards, and then when these shocks happened, of the First World War in particular, the thing blew down because there wasn't anything there. Whereas in America, as I understand it, this bedrock of Christian believers in America remained scripturally faithful. They actually believed in the Bible and continue to believe in the Bible. Whereas the Church of England kind of stopped believing in that, and instead it found a new role in social justice. So it signed up for kind of liberation theology, which came out of Africa, which had at its heart the idea that the West was evil, was founded in colonialism and oppression and all that. That came out of the churches, the World Council of Churches. And the Church of England kind of hitched its wagon to that particular dark star.
It went woke.
And at home, it put itself in the forefront of the secularizing ideologies which took a wrecking ball to the foundational moral precepts of the Bible. So there was no defense against secular liberal universalism, and this was particular to Britain, which emerged after the end of the Second World War, which you could say Britain had, been instrumental in winning, because Britain stood alone in 1940. Without Britain, it wouldn't have been won. And without the British belief in themselves as a nation worth defending, without that, it wouldn't have helped win the war. But it emerged from that war bankrupt, in hock to America, having lost or was in the process of losing what remained of its empire. And it lost its mojo. It lost its belief in itself as a nation, and it, therefore, in my view, its elites were vulnerable to the idea that came in after the Holocaust. There was something rotten about the West which needed to be replaced by something that was transnational, brotherhood of man, all that, which is what we've been living through in the last few decades. Now, Britain was the world leader in that, the absolute world leader in that, in the West. I think where Britain led, America followed, has followed. I think, I'm sure in America, Britain is regarded as, this rather sort of, second-rate power which has now completely lost its way. And it has lost its way. And it is a second-rate power by all kinds of conventional metrics. But in terms of cultural leadership of the West, Britain is still the leader. It's the home ship. It's the mothership of English-speaking culture.
Right.
It's where the Enlightenment came from. It's where modernity came from. It's where America came from. And where Britain goes, the rest of the West follows. Maybe more slowly, but it follows. Britain is the world leader in this, the most godless and the most vulnerable, therefore, to predatory Islamism. It's no coincidence that the Islamist world identified the West as being open to cultural conquest, because the West was hollowing out its own culture, but the world leader in this was Britain, and it alighted upon Britain as the centre. Al-Qaeda was formed in London. Britain, exhibited in all kinds of different ways the most. It was the furthest down the road of evacuating its identity of meaning and purpose, and the Islamists saw this. They're not stupid. They actually understand. Religion is the scaffolding of a culture. If you destroy the scaffolding, the building collapses, and they saw it. They saw it in Britain more than anywhere else. They didn't see it in America. Of course, because you have the churches in America, very strong. Britain was where you could actually really make such progress in adding to its demoralization and helping hollow it out. And then from there, you can actually make such great progress in the rest of the West. That's how I see it happening.
You wrote recently about Glastonbury and again, the chanting on the stage there, death to the IDF, and as you know, BBC broadcast that live. And I think it was Nigel Farage who made the point that, some other lady who had a semi-offensive tweet is serving something like 30 months in jail. And yet to sing, "Let's kill the Jews," the first thing you hear coming out of Britain, its leadership, is that, we'll look into this and see if there's anything to it. Has anything come of that? Has that band been held to account?
They've lost all their contracts.
Okay.
But the fact is, first of all, the lady who went to prison for 30 months for a tweet, that's gone viral around the world, and everybody believes that. It's not quite like that.
Okay.
She went to prison because she incited the murder of Muslims, and it went viral at a time when people were on the streets already rioting. And she went asked about it. She said, "I meant it. Burned down the mosques. I meant it."
Yeah.
She signed that. Now, that's not permissible. But the general point is true, that for the last 21 months, people have been on the streets screaming for the death of Jews, Okay, in Arabic, but nevertheless, you think the police might have worked it out by now. Death of Jews, destruction of Israel, these things are crimes under English law.
Right.
And they are not acted against, whereas if you stand up and say, with a placard, and say Hamas is a terrorist organization, or if you wrap yourself in the Israeli flag, the police will bundle you away, will try and arrest you. Why? This is the perversity of it. It's actually quite logical. It's a perverse logic. This is how it works. The police perceive that they have a task. Their task is to permit freedom of speech. Okay, in a liberal society, you must be careful to allow people to shout and scream. Okay, we agree with that. Fine. The police also see it as their task to prevent public disorder, to prevent violence. Right? They must not have violence. Now, they have two sets of people on the streets in these demonstrations. One is the people who broadly support Hamas, and the other are the people who broadly support Israel. The people who support Israel are never going to hurt anybody. They won't hurt a fly. They are not aggressive. They're not going to hit anybody. They're not going to cause a problem. They're not going to cause any violence. We can forget about them in terms of preventing violence. The Muslim hard left group who are supporting Hamas and are screaming for the death of Jews, they are going to be violent. We know they're going to be violent because we've had evidence of that in the past. They are violent. So we, the police, have to prevent the violence. What will cause them to be violent on these demonstrations, which we're managing to contain? We have to stop the people with the Israeli flag from even being seen by them. And if they walk across the road, that is a provocation. So the people in the Israeli flag who are holding up the placard saying Hamas are terrorists, they're the people who are provoking the violence. And therefore, they are the people who have to be arrested or shunted aside. Whereas the people who are screaming for the death of Jews can proceed. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy. This is the policing morality of the madhouse, and that's what's been going on for the last 21 months.
Yeah. The point you made more broadly, the thinking that is spreading even among the elites in the West is that Israel is the problem with the wars in the Middle East, right. And that if Israel wasn't there, exactly, it would be totally peaceful.
It's true. If Israel wasn't there, nobody would want to destroy it. And it's true, if the Jewish people didn't exist, nobody would want to murder them. Okay, is that where we've got to? Yes, in large parts of the West, that is exactly where we've got to. And the result is that in the diaspora, the Jewish diaspora outside Israel, especially in Britain, but it's also in America and France and other countries in Europe, the Jews are in a desperate position. They are surrounded now by an Islamic-led, but nevertheless far broader than that, swathe of people in the West who genuinely believe that Israel is the pariah state, that Israel is not the victim and target of genocide, but is perpetrating genocide, that Israel is not the victim and target of war crimes, which it is. Tens of thousands of war crimes. Every rocket was a war crime because it was aimed at killing Israeli civilians. Israel's just war of defense, because unfortunately there are some people who are civilians who get caught up in that, is presented as genocide. I mean, this is complete lunacy. But so many tens or even hundreds of thousands of people, or even more, are signed up to this lunacy. So this is what's happened, which is almost impossible to certainly to understand, but even to register the scale of it. We've never seen anything like this. I mean, Nazi Germany was bad enough. Nazism, infected Germany and other countries to a certain extent, but not much. It was Germany. It was a German problem. It's as if Britain and large swathes of the West are now, producing Nuremberg rallies every week. It's extraordinary.
Yeah, I think you made the point recently that in the case of Nazism, they tried to cover their crimes Whereas Hamas, I mean, they
have GoPro cameras.
That's right. They want to film it. They want to tell the whole world that they're killing Jews, and how it may not be on the mass scale that it was during the Holocaust, but there's I guess I would say a satanic, demented, thinking that you're wanting to, as you said earlier, I mean, this is something they do with ecstasy. They are excited about dying. They are excited about, you think of the guy that called his parents in Gaza and said, I've killed
Dad, I've killed all these Jews.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what is so terrifying is that the people running the West not only don't get it, but are lending their support to it. I mean, having said that, there are millions of decent people who remain sane and decent in Britain, in America, in Europe, who get it, who understand what's going on and are just horrified. But the people who run the culture, run the politics, run our cultural institutions, our education institutions, the media, they're lending support to this lunacy. What, Israel's committing genocide and war crimes? What, Israel's starving people with these, millions of meals being delivered every day? I mean, this is preposterous by any standard. It's a complete denial of rationality. This is what's so hard to imagine, to understand. And what's needed is for, the British government, the French government, to stand up and say, people, what are you talking about?
Right.
This is madness.
Yeah.
You got this completely wrong. You are being led astray by bad people. Not a word.
Right.
Not a word.
You said about Keir Starmer, I think you wrote this earlier, Starmer's defining characteristic is lack of leadership. It's not just the British Prime Minister's lackluster manner, his pedantry, his absence of inspiring rhetoric. It's that he so often says one thing that's promptly undermined by the next thing, that he ducks saying what he actually believes, and even when he does vouchsafe this, fails to follow through by leading from the front. So how do you end up with such weak leaders in these Western nations? You mentioned that there's still, millions and millions of people that see it, they understand it, they get it, but it just seems like leaders like this somehow get there time and time again.
Well, how did the American people end up having to choose between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump? Donald Trump, even if one thinks he's wonderful, he was an outlier. He didn't come from the establishment.
Right.
He was elected twice in revolt against an establishment which had lost the plot. The Democratic Party has completely lost the plot, just like the Labour Party in Britain and the progressive left, I think, across the West. So you have the same phenomenon, that you have millions of ordinary people for whom the political establishment, both Republican and Democrat, conventionally understood, and Labour and Conservative in Britain, but the whole establishment no longer stand up for what people understand to be their defining purpose, which is to protect their society and their culture and their nation. I mean, how do we get to that point? And when it comes to Britain, the Conservative Party, and this is another long story, but the Conservative Party lost sight of what conservatism is a long time ago, and as a result presided through one prime minister after another over accelerating disintegration of Britain as a properly functioning civic society, as well as destroying its defences. And consequently, when the place was literally running in sewage, the rivers were just sewers, and it was in practical terms that was true, and also in metaphorical terms, people said, this party cannot govern ever again. And consequently, Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party, which was not popular, he was not a popular leader, people didn't trust him, they didn't like him, but he was elected because we couldn't elect the Conservatives, is what people thought. So you have overall a situation which kind of reflects the loss of mojo of the culture, of the society, of the nation itself. It's reflected in the politics.
Yeah.
In America, it seems to me, forgive me for being presumptuous in saying so, but you've got a very divided society.
Oh, sure.
But between the Democrats and the liberal progressives on one side, and the Trumpists, and then the not so Trumpist Republicans on the other, but you've got a division.
Right.
In Britain, you don't really have a division. You have a kind of slide. Everyone's on the slide. People are on different gradations of the slide, but it's going down like that. There is no opposition. There's no division. So these Britain and America are taking different forms, but basically it's a culture that is going down. Now, it's possible that it will recover. It's possible that President Trump will haul it back. Possibly. I don't know. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Maybe he'll do what he can in the 4 years he has, but then he'll go backwards again. I've no idea.
Right.
None of us has any idea. But certainly at the moment, you have a West which is in trouble.
Right.
And all the things that we're talking about, I think, are manifestations of that.
Yeah.
Is existential difficulty.
Who do you see as the last great leader of Britain? How long ago would you have to go, and who would it be? We've talked before about your political views and how you kind of went through the transformation, and you mentioned before we started the interview that at the time you met Margaret Thatcher, you didn't like her, you opposed her. Since you've kind of gone through this transformation, do you now see her a lot differently?
I see it differently, certainly. But she had elements of greatness in her because she understood that Britain was on a trajectory of demoralization and decline, and she wanted to arrest it. She had a vision of Britain becoming great again, and that was a great thing. Mm-hmm. And she did some good things, some very good things. However, I am not a signed-up member of the Margaret Thatcher fan club at all. I think she encapsulated much of what's gone wrong with conservatism, where it became confused with economic liberalism, which basically, to cut a very long story short again, it basically lined up so-called conservatives on the same territory as the left, which is the individual. And that's the road to ruin, because we stopped looking after each other. And so what was the last great leader? Well, Churchill was a great leader. He saved the West. He didn't just save Britain, he saved the West. He was unequivocally a great leader. Without Churchill, there wouldn't be Britain. It wouldn't be a free society. So that's, I think, unequivocal.
Your prime minister here, Netanyahu, he's a pretty big fan of Churchill. He's read, I think, just about every book about Churchill.
Yeah.
Do you think that motivates his leadership over Israel?
I'm not an unabridged fan of Netanyahu either. I don't think journalists should be fans of anybody, frankly. I think we should always, as journalists, stand back and say they do good things, they do bad things. Yeah. Netanyahu is a great patriot. He is a great Jewish patriot. He understands Jewish history. He understands the arc of Jewish history. And he is totally and passionately and irrevocably and with his entire soul devoted to the survival of Israel and the Jewish people. Right. And that is his strength. And in that, his heart beats absolutely with Israel, with the people of Israel. And that's why he's still in power. Also, he has a strategic, a genius for strategic thinking. He understands the big picture in a way that I can't think of anybody else who does understand that. However, I think he has certain flaws which I think get in the way of the leader he should be. It's another big topic.
He's had recently he's had meetings with President Trump, and they've had big smiles, and President Trump's been out there to greet the motorcade as it drives up to the White House, and they've been talking about ending the war in Gaza and bringing the hostages back, and a lot of things actually. Do you feel like he's had 4 years separate his first term, and then his second term obviously just started in January? Do you see President Trump's relationship with Israel or his views regarding Israel different than you did during President Trump's first term?
Well,
like during the first term, he's moving the embassy to Jerusalem.
Yeah, exactly.
They recognize the Golan Heights as Israeli territory, and it just seems like this time around. And again, it's too soon to tell. He did help with the Iran strike,
for sure.
But there's also quite a few commentators in the States that feel like he's applying a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to end these wars quickly and to negotiate with people that, as you say, want to kill Jews. And so, yeah, it seems like it's more of a mixed bag this time around, from my perspective. How do you see it?
Well, it's all of those things. His first term, he turned out to be the most consequential American president from the point of view of shifting things along for the better in this region that anybody could remember. And this term, so far, he is still being thought of in the same way because of what he's done in terms of supporting Israel in its war, and coming in, bringing America in the way that he did. But there is great unease. I mean, I'm very, very uneasy because of these things we've been talking about, which is his passion for the deal, and also his passion, it would seem, to have it all done and dusted. I am the president, he said it over and over again. I am the president who's going to bring peace. I'm not going to make war. Okay, well, okay, we all understand that. We all want you to make peace, but there has to be, it mustn't be the peace of the grave. And, the idea you can stop war when, in fact, you could, the idea you can just sort of, threaten and do stuff, and then you'll bring people on side, and then it'll be ended, is very nice, but it's not realistic when you're dealing with the Republic of Iran, for example. So I'm still concerned about this. I think he still wants to end it all. Right. He wants to have, on his record, he doesn't want to be the president who, for most of his second term, presided over war. Well, he may not be able to avoid that, actually. Yeah. On the other hand, as I said before, he could actually short-circuit much of the Gaza stuff by taking the action against Qatar that he should be taking, which he's not taking. So I'm concerned about all those things. So life is complicated. President Trump is a complicated man. Prime Minister Netanyahu is a complicated man. Why does the world insist on seeing them as simple people? Either you are for them or you're against them. The idea that you can think that they do good things and bad things, no. They're either going to be perfect or completely dreadful. What is this? This is a cartoon caricature of human nature. Life's not like that. So I take it bit by bit. I look at what's being done, I look at what's being said, I try and form a conclusion from what's being said and what's being done. In these circumstances, we haven't got the faintest idea what is being said or done, frankly, because we're in a war and people with different agendas are pouring in the whole time. We don't know to what extent we, the public, are being played. So we try to make sense of it as much as we can, bit by bit. That's as much as I can do. I don't try and form an overall view from the point of view of, is this person good or bad? It's not like that.
Do you think Prime Minister Netanyahu will, to some extent, go along with this push to make deals?
I have no idea.
Do you feel like he's under intense pressure from President Trump?
Well, I'm pretty sure I can be confident in saying he's not under the kind of pressure he was under the administrations of President Biden or President Obama,
right,
who were basically these were hostile administrations to Israel.
Right.
And I think Netanyahu did very well in keeping the show on the road as much as he could. But there's no doubt these two men did us in Israel and the Jewish people terrible, terrible harm. And a lot of blood is on their hands. A lot of Israeli blood is on their hands. In comparison, it's a breeze. But was there pressure? Of course there's pressure. As soon as President Trump came in, virtually his first act was that the next day, Mr. Witkoff was dispatched to this country, to Israel, and said to Prime Minister Netanyahu, ceasefire. Ceasefire. It was disaster. It was a disaster. Ceasefire and let the aid in. The aid came in. It helped Hamas. It helped them regroup and restock, and the ceasefire helped them regroup and restock. As a result, Israelis have died. How is one to evaluate this? That's what Trump did on his first day. Later on, he sent his bombers in to demolish Fordo. One has to look at these things as they come and evaluate them as they come, and avoid these facile, overarching conclusions which bear no relation to reality at all.
Yeah. Just a couple more points before we conclude. As far as negotiations are concerned, the Bring Them Home Now campaign, I'm not Israeli, but it seems like that movement is getting stronger, where it's give up whatever in order to get the hostages back. And I guess there's still 50 or so that are in captivity. So where do you stand on, everybody obviously wants the hostages returned.
Of course.
You mentioned the Qatar example, that's the best way to apply the pressure to get it done. If that's not happening, where are you with respect to the push to give up, in the case of some of these lopsided swaps, all these terrorists in exchange for 5 or 10 Israeli
This is an impossible dilemma. It's an impossible dilemma because while Hamas hold the hostages, they have the cards in their hand.
I think you said in our last interview that it was sort of their ticket to survival.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. I don't know. I'm listening to a lot of voices, military voices. Some say, and there's an argument that's going on here the whole time about this, within the IDF, within the Israeli Defense Forces, between the IDF and the government, within the public. I do think that, the hostage issue has been unforgivably weaponized here in Israel by the left. The left has one objective only, to bring down Netanyahu. Whether or not you support Netanyahu is not the issue. You may think he's dreadful. To use the hostages, use their relatives, and what those relatives have been going through is unthinkable. To use that terrible distress, these vulnerable people, in order to weaponize the fate of the hostages against Netanyahu and to blame him, therefore, for not bringing them home, and to say there's blood on his hands because he's not brought them home. The price of bringing them home is Israel's surrender. That's been made absolutely clear by Hamas from the start. You want the hostages back? Fine. You surrender. We remain in power. We remain here. You guarantee not to come after us. You guarantee to stop the war. You guarantee everything for us. And then they come home. In other words, total surrender. So what Netanyahu is being asked to do is to sacrifice the lives and security of 10 million people for what was originally 240. Okay? Now that is unforgivable. To have a mass movement on the streets and threatening, intimidating, not just Netanyahu, but his emissary, Ron Dermer, outside Ron Dermer's house. These demonstrations the whole time. You're killing the hostages. What is this? It's disgusting. So I feel very strongly about that, as you can probably hear. In terms of the issue itself, I don't know how I would resolve it. It's the most terrible dilemma. I'm hearing military people say, we can do it. We need to starve them. We need to starve the Hamas out. And we're not being allowed to do that because America, even now, and the world is saying you must bring in aid. And we can now see, actually, again, we're trying to see through the fog of war. But what is clearly happening now is that there is a kind of new front that's emerged ever since the American Gaza Humanitarian Foundation got going. The Hamas is throwing everything at this because they have to prevent aid, food from getting to the Gazans. It must come to them, otherwise they're finished. So now we're seeing a very complicated situation and more games being played, I use the word games advisedly, in which the Hamas are claiming that the IDF are shooting Gazans dead in the food queues deliberately, and this is being peddled by people like the certain American news media outlets and in Britain, whereas in fact it's the Hamas who are killing Gazans for queuing up for food. And insofar as the IDF have killed people in those queues, it is clearly because they have been unable to cope with the fact that they are being rushed by possible Hamas people trying to kill them, and it's almost impossible to tell who is Hamas and who is not. Hamas don't wear uniforms. How do they know? It's the fog of war, the confusion of war being projected through this malevolent prism, which is the prism through which the Western media by and large present Israel. So it's a very complicated situation, you know, how the fate of the hostages can be resolved in this is not clear to me. I'm not a military person. I hear people saying, you know, if we starve, if we can isolate the Gazan civilians from the Hamas, so we'll feed the Gazan civilians, but then we will starve out the Hamas. I mean, can you imagine the Western reaction to the word starving anybody? They're not going to allow it. So it's so complicated. I don't know whether that would work. I have no idea. But I wouldn't like to be in Netanyahu's position.
Yeah, well, speaking of that one, you mentioned Hamas's demand is for Israel to surrender. Bibi's talked about Hamas surrendering or just totally crushing the right. Hamas government. How does that happen, given all of the complications you just said?
Again, I can't answer your question because I'm not a military expert in any shape or form. But I'm hearing that it is, in the view of military experts that I'm listening to, entirely possible and doable, and could have been done a long time ago, had the West not insisted on basically helping Hamas survive. It can be done. Okay, so people say you can't kill the ideology. Well, of course you can't kill the ideology. We're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. You're not going to kill the ideology of Islamism, political Islam. Of course not. But I am persuaded that you can destroy Hamas as a functioning military force and threat. I'm persuaded about that. How you keep that situation in Gaza from descending again is, I'm sure, being discussed at this very moment in America. That's why, you know, President Trump said, you know, encourage them to move out and move in people who will properly look after the place. I don't know whether that's possible, but the idea that you can destroy Hamas as a military force that can threaten Israel, of course that can be done.
Yeah. One last thing. You mentioned the meetings between President Trump and Bibi Netanyahu. What's your initial take on that, whether it's been helpful, successful, or harmful?
I have no idea, and nobody has any idea. Yeah. Nobody knows what these two men have said to each other. All we know is the spin and the agendas that are coming out from every possible source. I've got the faintest idea what's going on. I hope that eventually I will find out.
I would just say in conclusion that I love the clarity. Anytime I have a discussion with you, it just seems like how you see it, how you explain it, it's crystal clear.
Even when I'm very unclear, I'm clear that I'm unclear.
even when you're very tired, as you said before we started, you did a great job. So many things to mention. You write columns for the Times of London. I mentioned your book, The Builder's Stone, last time you were on the show. You're on X, and then you've got Melanie Phillips .substack.com.
That's where you can find all my work, yeah.
All right, well, thanks again for being so generous with your time. Melanie Phillips.
Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you so much.